Hello, you guys. How are you? How are you? How are you? Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. I want to thank those of you that are joining me once again from my YouTube channel. Thank you guys so very much for always engaging. Thank you for liking. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for following. Thank you for subscribing. Your support is so important. For those of you that are listening in on my podcast, Fundable by Design. Thank you again for being a part of my community where we talk about not just how to start your nonprofit organization, but how do we structure it? How do we raise funds for it? How do we sustain it so that the work that you do can continue? Today is going to be a very important conversation. And this conversation is going to be about starting a nonprofit with $0. Starting a nonprofit with $0. Okay. Starting a nonprofit with $0. And this is a fundraising misunderstanding that stops organizations before they even start. Okay. A lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, I mean 87 out of 100, 87 out of 100 of you have started your nonprofit organization with $0. Jen, I started my nonprofit. We did not have any money. The organization did not have a budget. The organization did not have a plan or a strategy to raise any money. Jen, I started my nonprofit paying for everything out of my pocket. All right. So starting a nonprofit with no money and what it is that leads to. Okay. And why grants or waiting for a grant is often a sign that you, the founder, the person that started the organization, that you don't yet understand how nonprofits are funded. Okay. Those of you that started your nonprofit organization with no money, and you think that the organization is free. You started the nonprofit with $0 because in your mind, the nonprofit is free. Right? And so, because you think it's free, and because you think that by starting a nonprofit, you can get a grant, or you starting your nonprofit, that's where you can get funding. You start the nonprofit, and then you find yourself waiting for a grant. I want to talk about this misunderstanding. All right. I did a podcast earlier, and I want you to be able to go back and listen to that podcast that I did earlier. And we talked about the reality behind starting a nonprofit with zero money. We talked about how many of you begin by filing the paperwork, believing that once the organization exists, that funding will then eventually follow. Right? I started my nonprofit, Jen, but we didn't have a budget. We didn't have finances. I started out, Jen, paying for everything out of my pocket. And I want to go deeper into one of the biggest barriers that many of you are facing today. Okay? And it's not paperwork, and it's not grants, and it's not even money. The biggest barrier that many of you have, the biggest problem that many of you all have, is what you think about fundraising. I want you to hear me now. Many of you have started your nonprofit organization and you say, Jen, funding is my biggest issue. Jen, we started our nonprofit organization and I'm paying for everything out of my pocket. Jen, I started my nonprofit and we don't have any donors. Jen, I started my nonprofit and we don't have supporters. We don't have contributors. We don't have funding, right? And that's because there is a belief that quickly shapes the behavior of many of you, especially in the early stages. Now, earlier today, I talked about how many of you think that the nonprofit is free. Jen, I started my nonprofit, and because you think it's free, right? You think, and it's not because that thought came from nowhere. That thought came from what you heard. When you type in, how do I start a nonprofit? Steps to starting a nonprofit, right? You type that into Uncle Google, you type that into Cousin Chat, You type that in, and what does it say? It says file the paperwork. Steps to starting a nonprofit, file the paperwork. It might say register at the state, file the 1023 form, and bam, you started a nonprofit. So in your mind, you think, oh my gosh, starting a nonprofit is the paperwork, because that's what happens when you type it in. Did anybody type in, how do I start a nonprofit? Did any of you type in steps to starting a nonprofit? And it says register at the state, get your articles of incorporation, get an EIN, and get a board, and then fill out the 1023 form. So you think, oh my gosh, I started a nonprofit, but that's not what happened. What happened was you did the paperwork to be recognized as a not for profit. That's all that says. That's why I tell y'all every day, don't y'all listen to Cousin Chat. Cousin Chat got y'all out here thinking that you started a nonprofit because that's what you typed in. How do I start a nonprofit? And Cousin Chat said, fill out the paperwork. That's all it said. Okay? And so in your mind, you think that's all I got to do to start. And that's not starting. That's the first problem. The first problem is you started by filling out the paperwork, but what chat did not tell you were the expenses. Put expenses in the chat. Chat did not tell you about the expenses that you immediately start experiencing, right? Because now you got to put together a website. Then you got to pay for the state, right? The registered state. Then you got to pay for the IRS. And then you pay for you start paying for the program. You start paying for materials and supplies. You start paying for the gas. All of these expenses start coming up. But chat didn't mention that. And what quickly shapes your behavior, what quickly shapes your understanding, is that now it's hard, especially in this early stages. And that belief, I want you to hear me now, that belief sounds like, well, Jen, the nonprofit is free. Jen, the nonprofit is free. And so then fundraising, right, feels like begging, because now your mind has been shaped that the organization is free. The organization is free. And I, not knowing that your organization is supposed to bring in money. It's supposed to bring in money. In fact, the 1023 form, the form that Cousin Chat told you to fill out, that form states that your organization that you are completing the application in the name of is supposed to bring in money and project the money that's going to be brought in for the next 3 to 4 years. But you skip over that. You skip right over that because that's not really stressed when you ask Cousin Chat, how do I start a nonprofit? Chat doesn't go into those details. So now you have been shaped to thinking, my nonprofit is free. I just need a grant. My nonprofit is free. I just need partners. I just need donors. But I don't know how to get that. I don't know where those things come from. I don't know where to begin. And because you were quietly shaped into believing that the nonprofit is free, you now begin to feel like fundraising feels like begging. I don't like begging, Jen. I don't like asking for things. I'd rather just start paying for everything out of my own pocket. And so now you are creating your organization's most expensive mistake. And this is you all starting your nonprofit with $0. No money, no money. We don't have any money, Jen. We don't have any funding, Jen. And because You didn't know how the sequence of starting your nonprofit is to be according to the paperwork, according to the 1023 form. The 1023 form, before you get your 501c3, the paperwork says that you know how to generate money for the next 3 to 4 years. You know how to structure, you know how to project, you know how to bring in money, but you skipped over that because cousin Chat said, just fill out the paperwork. Just fill out the paperwork. Or you heard, start a nonprofit, you can get a grant, right? You heard start a nonprofit, you can get a grant. And you ask Chat, how do I start a nonprofit? Chat says, fill out the paperwork. But now you stuck. Now you're waiting on a grant. Now you're waiting on somebody to discover your organization. Now you're waiting on funding opportunities to just appear. You're waiting on funding opportunities to just appear. And while you're waiting, something very important is overlooked. Let me say this. The nonprofit organization was never designed to operate by waiting for funding. I'm going to say that again. The nonprofit organization was never designed to operate by waiting for funding. How many of you all are waiting for funding? Jen, I started my nonprofit, but we don't have any donors. Jen, I started my nonprofit, but we don't have any money coming in. Jen, I started my nonprofit and I'm paying for everything out of my pocket. Jen, I started my nonprofit and I can't find board members to help us raise money. Jen, I started my nonprofit and we had to scale back our programs because we didn't have any money. We can't get a grant. Jen, I was starting my nonprofit and I'm just waiting on a grant. I'm just waiting on funding. That was never how it was designed. It was designed to raise funding. It was never designed to wait for funding. That's what the paperwork says. It was designed to raise funding. And the difference between the two ideas, the idea is I'm going to start my nonprofit and I'm just going to wait for funding. Or I'm going to start my nonprofit and start raising funding. Those are two different ideas. Most of you are starting your nonprofit organizations. You're paying for everything out of your pocket and you're just waiting for funding to come from somebody. I'm waiting on a partner. I'm waiting on a grant. I'm waiting on a collaborator. I'm waiting on a sponsor. I'm waiting for somebody to just show up and start giving us fund. I'm waiting on to do the fundraiser. I'm just waiting. That's not how you're designed. You are designed to raise the funds. The paperwork says so. The short form says, how do you project to need $50,000 in any of the next 3 years? Yes or no? Yes or no? That's the short form. The long form says, project how much money you're going to bring in for the next 3 to 4 years. That's the paperwork. But that ain't what Chat told you. Chat didn't tell you that. Chat didn't point that out. Y'all skip right on over that. And now you are waiting for funding. Jen, we started our nonprofit and we don't have any funding, so I'm having to pay for everything out of my pocket. The organization is not bringing in any money. You're paying for everything on your credit card, right? Those are two separate ideas. Which idea do you fall into? Are you the one that's waiting for funding? Or are you designed, structured to raise funds? Because the difference between these two ideas determine whether your organization grows or whether your organization struggles to survive. So today we're going to talk about this. Why so many nonprofit founders feel uncomfortable with fundraising. where the idea that grants are the primary funding source, where did that actually come from? Why waiting for grants create financial instability? And what fundraising really means when it's done correctly. Now, who am I? My name is Jennifer. I am a nonprofit expert over 40 years of experience. I'm a professional fundraiser. I am a grant writer. I am a nonprofit strategist. This has been my entire career, starting, growing, and funding nonprofit organizations. This is what I do. This has been my entire career for 40 years. And when those of you that understand what fundraising truly is, your entire financial model begins to make sense. Most of you don't know what fundraising is. All right. When fundraising feels like you're begging, right? Jen, I don't like fundraising. I don't like asking for money. I feel like I'm begging, Jen. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? When you are designed to raise the funds to accomplish your mission, that's how you're designed. Many of you start your nonprofit organization because you deeply care. You care passionately about a problem that you want to solve, right? Jen, I want to start a nonprofit to help single moms. Jen, I want to start a nonprofit that's a transitional house. Jen, I want to start a nonprofit to help people not go through things that I went through, right? I want to help other people, Jen. I got a son, I got a daughter, or myself went through something. And so I know about a little some of this. And so I want to help people who are like me. You want to solve a problem. But when it comes to asking for money, you feel uncomfortable. Why? Why? Largely because culturally, come with me now, culturally, many of you were raised to believe that asking others for financial support is inappropriate or embarrassing. And the language that you use reflects this belief. You say things like, I don't want to bother people. I don't want to bother people. I don't want to ask people for money. I don't want to feel like I'm begging. So instead of fundraising, many of you begin looking for alternatives that feel more comfortable. And one of those most common alternatives is a grant, right? Grants feel easier emotionally because they appear to remove the personal element. Instead of asking people directly, let me just submit an application. I'll submit the application and I'll just wait. I'll just hire a grant writer and I'll just wait for the grant. But this creates a misunderstanding about how nonprofit funding actually works. Grants were never intended to replace fundraising. Now, what is fundraising? Fundraising is a strategy. It's not even about money. It's a strategy. Fundraising is a strategy. It is not about begging for money. But many of you don't know that. Grants were never intended, and it's impossible for grants to replace raising funds from other places. Grants were intended to support the organization that already has fundraising capacity. Now, I've been writing grants for 40 years. Okay. I've written for hundreds of millions of dollars in grants. Grants are not and cannot ever be your sole source of revenue. let's talk about where the grants will fund the work message came from, right? Start a nonprofit, you can get a grant. Start a nonprofit, you can get a grant funding, right? Where'd that message come from? Now, again, I've been doing this for 4 decades, okay? 4 decades I've been doing this work as fundraising. Over the past 2 decades, several trends have contributed to the belief that grants are the primary funding source for nonprofits. And again, I've been doing this a long time. I'm like a hidden figure, okay? You don't see very many people of color who are experts in the field of nonprofit space. Most of my peers and my counterparts, um, they don't look like me, okay? And there are not many people that talk about or explain the process, okay? And this idea that grants being a primary source of funding comes from the way nonprofit startup information is presented online. I'm going to say that again. The way that nonprofit startup information is presented online, many articles and videos focus on steps of starting your nonprofit. They focus on filing the paperwork for the nonprofit. They focus on applying for the tax exempt status. They focus on finding grant opportunities. All right. And while these resources are very helpful, they skip a critical piece of context. They talk about how to apply for grants. Jen, I need to learn how to apply for grants. Jen, I need to learn how to write a grant. Jen, how do I get grants? Jen, how do I get grants funding? Jen, I need a grant writer. All right. But they rarely explain, how do organizations become ready for grants? Did you hear what I said? How do organizations become ready for grants? The grant funder is going to receive hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. How do they make the decision on who's going to get the grant? Now, I'm a grant writer. I'm also a grant reviewer. So I'm very knowledgeable and experienced in this area. The grant funder has an expectation that you are financially structured. Nobody talks about that, though. They talk about filing your paperwork. How do you write a grant? How do you research grant? What things go into the grant application? But very few people talk about, how do you become grant ready? How do you become an organization that the grant funder is attracted to funding? Another source of misinformation that contributes to this belief comes from those that provide grant writing services and consultants who market and emphasize grant funding as the primary pathway to nonprofit revenue, right? Now, like I said, I'm a grant writer. I write grants, okay? I write books on how to write grants, okay? I've been writing grants a long time. I don't want to write your grant. I'm saying to you that the people that are marketing grant writing services, that's how they get paid. They write and fill out applications, right? The consultants, that's their job, is to say, listen, I can write you a grant. And so that emphasis on selling grant writing services, nothing wrong with that. And being a consultant to help you to understand the grant writing process, or to help you to be trained to write a grant writer, it makes you think, after you hear it enough, to think that, man, grant funding is the primary pathway to generating revenue for the organization. And while grants can be an important revenue stream, they only represent one piece of a much larger fundraising system. You've got 16 streams of revenue, 16. Grants are one. Grants overall are never going to, will never, ever, ever fund and sustain your organization. And you don't want it to. Because why? It takes a long time for the grants to come in. After you've spent that money, you still got to have money coming in after those grant dollars have been spent. But nobody talks about that. They talk about get a grant, get a grant. I got a grant list. Would you like a grant list? Would you like to join my website where we offer grant writing opportunities? We got all kinds of foundations. You can research grants. So now you done spent all this time researching grants, but you're still not grant ready. And the reality is this. You began to be programmed to think grants are my solution. Now, listen, it's not your fault. But I'm here to tell you the reality is those organizations that you see operating, they have the buildings, they have the staff, they've been around for decades, if not generations. They're not relying on grants. They are relying on several revenue sources. Everybody has eight. Everybody has eight streams of revenue. You've got 16 revenue sources. You've got individuals, you've got corporations and businesses, you've got earned income, you got grants, you got fundraisers, you got partnerships, collaborations, in kind. That's eight. You have total 16 revenue sources. According to the IRS, you are supposed to be bringing in money from all of those revenue sources, but nobody talks about that. But when you mostly hear about grants, that's all you hear, grants, 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 grants. You begin to believe that your entire funding model revolves around writing proposals. Let me tell y'all the truth. Fundraising existed long before grant writing became common. Can I tell you guys? Again, I've been raising funds for 40 years. I can remember writing a grant, and the grant funder might have received 25, 30 proposals. But because so many people are wanting you to focus on grants, because it's a service that people sell, right? Grant funders now are receiving hundreds, if not thousands, of grant applications. And not everybody's going to get that grant. Out of 100 proposals, maybe 15 are going to get funded. But nobody talks about that. Those other streams of revenue are your largest source of nonprofit funding. Why? Because it takes so long to get the grant, right? You submit your application, it may take you 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 months before you get those grant dollars. And then when those grant dollars have been spent, you have to replace those grant dollars. With what? Other streams of revenue, other funding sources, fundraising. One of the reasons that many of you struggle with fundraising is that you misunderstand what fundraising actually means, which is why you didn't structure it, right? Many of you are struggling with generating money now. Why? I don't have a plan to fundraise, Jen. I don't know how to fundraise. And when I started my nonprofit, I didn't even make fundraising a priority because I was just waiting on a grant. And many of you believe that fundraising is begging, and it's not. Begging is asking someone for money without offering value or purpose. That's begging. Without offering value or purpose. Fundraising is different. Fundraising really is the process of connecting people who care about your cause with an opportunity to support meaningful work. Y'all, when I tell you this thing is easy, people say to me all the time, Jen, you make it sound so easy. It is. You make it sound so easy, Jen. It is. We're not asking for anything. We're giving value. We're solving a problem. We're benefiting the community. We're not begging. It's about inviting others to participating in solving a problem that benefits or affects the community. When it's done well, it's not transactional. For many of you, you think about it as a transaction. I need a donation. I need a donation, Jen. We need donors. You think about it from a transactional point of view instead of a relational point of view. Donors give because they believe in the mission. Donors give because they trust the organization to carry out the mission responsibly. They're not giving it because you need money. No, they believe. They believe in the mission. They believe and trust the organization. That's fundraising. It's that simple. It's that simple. It's not about trying to convince people to give. It's about building the relationships with people who already care about the work. Now, truth be told, that's the grant application too. The grant funder is not a stranger. A donor is not a stranger. The grant funder says, tell me a little bit about something. Convince me. Show me what it is that you guys do. Tell me the value of what you do. But many of you talk about what you need. We need money. We need a building. We need. And this is why when you're waiting for that grant, it creates financial instability. When you avoid fundraising or bringing in those other resources and wait for grants instead, these are the challenges that appear. These are the challenges that you face. First, grant funding, first of all, is very competitive, right? The grant funder is going to receive hundreds, if not thousands of proposals. So grants are very competitive. Two, they have limited funding. Again, not everyone's going to get that grant. Grant funders look for organizations that already demonstrate stability. They want to see evidence that the organization has leadership capacity, has financial systems, have program outcomes, and community support. Third, grants rarely fund the entire operating budget of an organization. They might support specific programs or initiatives, right? They may have designated ways that you can spend their money. Those are called designated funds. So even if the organization receives the grant, you're going to spend that money. You still are going to have to generate money from other places. You get the grant and then you spend the grant. Where's money coming from after that? Are you hearing what I'm saying? And so when you wait for a grant, instead of building the relationships, you delay. You delay your financial foundation that the organization needs and what is expected. Let me tell you guys why you ignore this, right? Now, y'all who follow me, you know I say this every day. And many of you don't want to put your organizational structure together. You don't want to put your infrastructure together, right? You just ignore what I say and you go on and think, let me just work harder on this program, which means you're spending more money on that program, all right? And this is a real consequence. This is a real consequence of the grant misconception that many of you overlook. That if you believe that your primary financial solution will come from a grant, you're not going to prioritize building the systems that generate money from those other streams of revenue. You won't do it. You're thinking, oh, I'm just gonna wait for a grant. And while you're waiting for that grant, you're paying for everything out of your pocket. You don't have any funders, you don't have any supporters, you don't have any contributors, you don't have board members that can even help you raise money. Now you have to scale back your program, maybe even change your mission, or quietly stop doing the program altogether. And because you are the sole funder, right? You're paying for everything out of your pocket. Anything happens to you, the organization stops. And that's a consequence of waiting for a grant. And you have not prioritized building the system, building the structure to bring in money from those other 15 revenue sources. I don't. So now you don't have a donor management system. Jim, I got a CRM, Jim, but I don't know how to use it. No, Jim, we don't have anyone on our mailing list. No, Jim, we don't have any donors or supporters. No, Jim, we don't have board engagement. No, Jim, we don't have a fundraising plan. No, Jim, we don't have a budget or financials. But these things are exactly what the grant funder looks for when they're evaluating on who's getting the grant. Those very things that you did not put in place are the very things that the grant funder is looking for. In that grant application, it says, what is your financials? What's your budget? Where else does money come from? What's your plan for sustainability? In other words, that infrastructure that you skip early on, no, Jen, we didn't put a fundraising plan in place. No, Jen, I don't know how to raise any money. No, Jen, I don't have a plan for raising any money. No, Jen, I didn't know I was supposed to raise any money. I'm a nonprofit. Well, Jen, if I could just get a grant, you skipped the sequence of putting your organization together. And that's the very reason that you're stuck. Money is not your problem. You've got 16 revenue sources. 16 revenue sources. Everybody has 8. But you skip that waiting on a grant. Now, I know you didn't know, right? You didn't know. You didn't know because that's not what Cousin Chat told you. That's not what Google told you. You asked steps to starting a nonprofit and it just said paperwork. That's all it said. I want you guys to rethink your organization. The organization and the paperwork are not the same thing. The paperwork does not say you started a nonprofit. The paperwork says that your paperwork to be recognized as a nonprofit has been filed. I'm going to say that again. That when you fill out that 1023 form, it just states that the paperwork for your organization to be recognized as tax exempt, not a nonprofit organization started. That's not what it says. Fundraising is not about asking people to rescue your organization. It's about creating opportunities for people to invest in positive change within the community. And when you begin approaching fundraising as relationship building rather than solicitation, you'll see it differently. You'll realize that you're not asking for something personal, but that you are offering a benefit to the community. And that the structure that is set up to generate the revenue so that you can continue to do that beneficial work is expected. But if you don't see that, if you don't understand that, if you don't perceive that, then you're going to continue to pay for this out of your own pocket. You're going to continue to be stuck. And you're going to continue to lack the support that you are supposed to have. All right? Starting a nonprofit with zero money is a very expensive Way to go. Many of you followed what chat said, filled out the paperwork. So you paid for the registration of the state. You paid the IRS either $275 or $600. You paid for the website out of your pocket. You paid for possibly the program, the materials, the supplies. You're paying for the gas. You're paying for the snacks. You're paying for the phone. You're paying for the internet. You're paying for everything for the organization. The organization has no resources coming in. And now you're struggling. And you started it with zero money because you thought it was free. You thought once I started or filed that I could get a grant. And many of you are finding that that's not true. So starting a nonprofit without understanding how funding works creates unnecessary hardship. Listen, the moment you realize and recognize that nonprofits are designed to raise resources to do the work of the mission. Grants can play an important role in that process, but they're not the starting point, and they're not the point to wait on. And when you embrace that you have choices, you have multiple ways to bring in money. And in fact, you are structured and designed to bring in money from multiple places for the next 3 to 4 years. That you are structured as an organization according to the paperwork and according to the expectation of the IRS and everyone else. That you are supposed to bring in money. Now, many of you are caught between, I want to do the work, but you don't recognize, how do I sustain the work? I want to do the work, Jen, but I haven't thought about how I'm going to sustain it. How am I going to continue it? Because you're doing everything. You're running the program, you're running the organization. Many of you are even doing the board. You're trying to figure out how to fundraise. You're trying to take grant writing classes. You're doing everything. So that means if anything happens to you, there is no money, there is no support for help, for duplicating yourself, for delegating. If anything happens to you, this organization stops. And until you understand that you are supposed to bring in money, that's how you're designed. And that you're not just building or starting a program that you're passionate about, but that you are starting an organization that you know how and is structured to be sustainable. I know many of you have heard the word nonprofit and you've fallen for the okie doke. I know you didn't know. It's okay. You didn't know. Listen, my name is Jennifer. I am your nonprofit expert. I help organizations put together the plans, the strategies, the systems, the tools so that your organization doesn't just start. Many of you have not thought beyond starting. You've not thought about structuring. You've not thought about sustaining. You've not thought about scaling. How do I generate the money to hire help? How do I generate the money to pay salaries? How do I generate enough money so that you are not tied to this thing, that you can take a break, you can take a vacation, you can get paid for the work that you do? Many of you have not even thought about the cost of running the organization without bringing in any money, or what it costs you, or missed opportunities to bring in money. Because many of you are not structured to raise money, you guys are losing out on about $75,000 to upwards of $300,000 a year by not being structured to raise money. You're missing out on grant opportunities. You're missing out on the other 14, 15 streams of revenue. You're missing out on the opportunity to scale in terms of revenue to hire help so that you could do more work. That's the only way that you can scale the program, right? You're missing out on those opportunities, those volunteer hours that you're spending and not being reimbursed for. That's money lost. And the funder, the grant funder, the supporter, the contributor, um, those revenue issuing authorities, they're not looking at that program and they're not looking at your passion. They're looking at the financial structure of your organization. And if you're constantly, we don't have any money, we don't have any money, we don't have any money. No, we don't have a budget. No, we don't have a plan to raise money. No, we don't have a fundraising plan. No, we don't have a board. No, I'm doing everything by myself. They're not going to pick your organization over the other ones that have those things in place. That is how you are supposed to be. And unfortunately, for many of you that relied on Cousin Chat and Uncle Google in them free groups, they didn't tell you the right way to start. If they did, you would be bringing in money the way the IRS said so. The 1023 form says that you have a plan, have a structure, have a system to bring in money for the next 3 to 4 years. That is the paperwork that gets you the 501c3. It does not say fill out the paperwork and then try to figure out where money comes from later. All right? I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that this has been clear. Okay? I hope that this has been encouraging because you can only act on what you know. And many of you are trying to guess your way through this. There's no guessing needed. It's already structured. It's already laid out. It's already a part of your strategy. Okay? Thank you all for listening. My name is Jennifer. I am your nonprofit expert. 40 years of doing this work. And I hope that my experience of not just starting nonprofits, running nonprofits, fundraising for nonprofits, scaling nonprofits helps you to understand that that is how you are structured. Okay? It's not hard. It's just a system. It's not hard. It's the way you're designed. All right? Put your comments down below. We have several trainings that are coming up. If you would like to know more about that, that'll be in the description as well. And again, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. And I will see you all next time.